everyone, welcome back to Out of Bound, a Microsoft security podcast. I'm Andrew Young, modern work specialist at Digger Data and also a Microsoft MVP in security. And join with me is...
Hi, I'm Shahan. I'm a Microsoft MVP in security as well, and I'm specialized in Microsoft Defender, Intune, and Identity and Access Management.
And I'm Anthony Porter, a cloud security architect at Canon Business Services, specializing in the Intune and Defender space.
Well, thanks for coming back to tuning in again after such an amazing episode last time with Meryl Fernando, who is the principal product manager of the Entra product at Microsoft. And following on from that kind of assignment and the buzz, and we did notice that a lot of the audience members did enjoy hearing about Entra and what it can offer. We thought we might continue with some of the other products or solutions and services within it. But before we do that, let's jump into some of the latest news announcements and maybe some of the events that are upcoming. So the first one we want to mention, this one's close to home for me. It's the M365 Copilot deployment blueprint, and this can come in either PDF format or PowerPoint, and it's really part of Microsoft's Secure Future initiative, where they're designing things that are secure by default. So with Microsoft Purview, we want to be able to protect against the internal or external oversharing, and part of Microsoft Purview being such a beast itself, one of the employees at Microsoft, his name's Ray Reyes, he actually works with Purview. He has updated his Purview deployment card, and there is, going from the beginning to the end, there's a roadmap of that journey from where do you start, classifying your data, implementing labels, preventing loss, leakage, and so on. So we will share that in the show notes, and you can see it all in its glory. Along with that, at the same time, there is dynamic watermarking now for sensitivity labels. So what this means is, as a user, if you're signed in and you've got a document that's open that's of specific sensitivity, it can now display your username as part of the watermarking. And this can have various views, and it is cross-platform. So you will see it on Windows, Mac, mobile devices, and so on. Straying away from the compliance and the governance side of things, the Microsoft Intune connector for Active Directory. So this one probably hits close to home for Jahan and Anto as well. But this one was more designed for the Entra hybrid joining of your devices. And that connector, from May onwards this year, it will have a new version, and it will enforce the use of a managed service account. So before, it was using the local system account. And as I mentioned before, Microsoft's aiming to secure everything. So getting rid of that, access to the local system account, which could have been compromised and all sorts of bad things could happen. And then another piece I want to quickly touch on is the Exchange Online tenant outbound email limits. So Microsoft has cracked down on this now. If you've got a tenant with a small number of Exchange Online licensing, you're going to have a smaller amount of outbound emails. And same thing with trial accounts or trial licensing. They don't want you to just spin up a tenant, apply a trial, or get one license and start creating spam bots, right? So that's one of the things. And I guess in the bigger, well, legitimate organizations, they will also be those limits as well. They'll be slightly bigger because you've got more licensing, and we'll share a bit of a table of what those limits look like.
Yeah, I think that being said, I got one update from Entra side of things, Identity and Access Management. So this is basically in public preview at the moment, QR code authentication for frontline users. So what basically happens with these frontline users when they sign into Microsoft 365 services, they basically will have to sign in with the QR code. So every user would get a unique QR code. So the idea is basically they can keep their QR code attached to the actual name tag or the company name tag. So let's say if they're not using a Windows computer, if they're using let's say a tablet or an iPad or a phone, when they're signing into the application, for example, or let's say Entra or something like that. So they have the QR code sign-in option. So when they click on that, then the camera will activate and they can scan their QR code. So it will be the identifier, basically the QR code and the PIN number unique to the user. Only the user knows that PIN number, and they can sign in. So that's basically easing, or the how people can use depending on what they do. But Microsoft don't recommend that for the information users, such as people are using in working in HR or IT or finance. This is mainly for the frontline workers. And also some things that you can attach, where we are basically discussing in a moment as well, conditional access policies. So with that, you can say if the employee is using this application within the corporate network, go with this authentication method, which is a QR code. Now it's available under the authentication methods as well. But if they're using from a different location, get them to use with the MFA and their password or any other option. So that's very flexible as well. And also they recommend, obviously this is common sense as well. If the tag is lost, if the QR code is lost, they need to generate a new QR code for the user. So things like that. So I think that's security wise, it's a good option as well. And also this removes the usage of passwords as well in a way. So that's the new one, which is in the public preview at the moment.
I think just adding to that, so a part of that method, it also allows you to set some other controls in it, like specific to the requirement, such as the pin length. I believe it's 8 to 20 digits. The lifetime of the QR code, I believe it defaults at 1 year, 365 days. There is some limitations to it, be it that everything in preview does have limitations. So that is the unsupported user scenarios, specifically around self-service pin resets, bulk provisioning, the scanning by a barcode scanner, because that's a method people actually use. It doesn't work with desktop apps or browsers, and also the custom tenant endpoints for sign-in. So it is an awesome option to start moving away from that password situation, but it is still in preview, but 100% you should be checking it out if you are, if that's available within your fleet.
Yeah, mostly what I've seen is those limitations are the things maybe that they are probably will add in the roadmap of that application going forward, or the feature going forward as well. So that's something to look forward to. I would say if someone is interested in looking at the QR code authentication method.
Yeah, and just a reminder for any products or services that are still in public preview that you don't get that official support from Microsoft. So things are likely to go wrong and break. So they'll do the best, but it'll just be best if it won't be the same tier of support that you normally get.
Yeah, don't put all your eggs in one basket before the basket's constructed. You'll end up with egg on the floor. Look, I think the direction that Microsoft is moving with trying to remove passwords and become a more passwordless platform, even with what we touched on with Merrill in regards to what they're doing within the ID governance space, they're making leaps and bounds towards being a more secure platform. And approaching that passwordless with everyday devices these days. So look, even if it's probably not as supported, I would hazard that if it's hit public preview, that it is likely ready to go. It's just probably, don't move your entire fleet from FIDO to, QR, because it's not there yet.
Yeah. All right. I think, you got anything new, Anto?
No, please. I'm pretty sure all of you guys have covered it off. I've, to be completely honest, I've been studying for SC 401, which is the beta exam for information protection. I've got it tomorrow that I've got to sit, and as much as I passed SC 400, I'm finding it almost a struggle to relearn what I believe I've learned. But I am excited that they have added DSPM for AI as a core function of that. Obviously, it's quite important. Even just the understanding of what that DSPM for AI does allow for an organization to do, whether that be, the oversharing, or at least how your data might be communicating to co-pilots or third-party generative AI, and how to protect that as well. So I think what DSPM for AI is doing is essentially, in my opinion, almost that the stepping stones that you need to get, I guess, a base for data security. Now, all of that is only within E5 licensing, but once again, I think it's one of those situations where it really is advanced technology that it is utilizing, and it is proactive and not necessarily reactive. So if you're looking towards what's capable within the E5 suite for compliancy, I solely stand by the DSPM for AI itself would be 100% worth it. But no, I guess nothing new from my sense. I've kind of just been stuck in the books.
Well, actually, I took the beta for that last week, so a bit of insight on it. But it is under NDA, I guess, so any of the contents I can't really talk about it. But absolutely, if you see any study guides or any mention around the criteria that you'll be tested on, it's definitely going to cover those topics. Like we mentioned last time, they've pretty much taken out all the heavy compliance related content, and you're left with the information protection, data loss prevention, insider risk management, and a little bit mix and match of what's left. So most of the other stuff has been moved into, say, the applied skills assessments, but definitely that DSPM for AI is one of the new topics they've added in, so kind of offsets the content they've removed.
When have you got a book for, Cheyenne?
Yes, soon. I think I'm right now. So definitely need to bag that in my badge list as well. So
I think all of us have got enough badges at this stage, but why not? Why not another one?
Speaking of soon, there are some events. Some are on at the moment, actually, as of yesterday morning. So there's the Technical Takeoff, which is the Windows and Intune series of webinars. There's the SharePoint Hackathon. So some I guess more webinars around what's happened, what's new, and coming to SharePoint Online, SharePoint Agents, the SharePoint Framework, and so on. So the hackathon is for those out in the wild to create some things and submit them for, I guess, the tech community to marvel at and use in their own intranet deployments as well. And after that, there is the AI-powered business applications bootcamp starting on the 18th. So if you remember a couple of episodes ago, Anthony had very robust note-taking from the summer bootcamp. So I look forward to some more notes from you. Might be a different domain, but there are some things that we'll be interested in. So keep an eye out for that.
Yellow Hat is the other one that's technically, when this goes live, the Yellow Hat will have just finished. I'd like to think those sessions will be readily available for you to watch somewhere in their fleet of potential VODs. But Yellow Hat, so that was the Microsoft Security Technologies focused event. I believe it's in Amsterdam, and it was live to view. So definitely check out Yellow Hat. They as of this going live, they've just finished their event, but I guarantee there'll be some content there that you'd want to see.
Okay, that's enough about what's new. So let's go back to the topic we want to talk about today. So off the back of the last episode we had regarding the Entra space, let's look at one of the foundational or fundamental components of Entra ID. So with Entra ID Plan 1, the most popular feature that you get from that is conditional access. And now that we're focusing a lot on, say, the zero trust principles and defense in depth, multiple layers of protection, it's probably a good place to start. So might hand it over to Shahan just to cover some.
Yeah. I think that's mainly one of the foundational building blocks in Entra, and it should be one of the building blocks in the identity access management ecosystem as well. So I think I spoke about the conditional access policy some time ago in the Adelaide user group as well, the maturity levels of the conditional access policies, and how you can map the conditional access policies to different scenarios that you have. And we're going to discuss a specific scenario today. And also, as you can see, the topic of the episode today, Chronicles of a Rogue Device. So that maps to the BYOD. It's basically a love-hate relationship with BYODs as well. Either you allow your BYODs in the environment, or either you have a stringent policy saying, no, we don't allow BYOD in the environment, something like that. And if you have BYOD devices, that means you should have, there's no negotiation there. You should have your policies enabled to, make sure rogue devices would not access your information, or maybe users devices which are not compliant and they're not aware of that as well, will not leak information back to the internet or to a bad actor. So that's why we need the conditional access policies to govern and put some rigor around the identity and access management ecosystem, and basically protect the data as well. So we need to identify what sort of policies that we need to implement in the first place, and any foundational ones. Can we use any templates in the conditional access policies? And also how to filter the devices. So, only the registered devices, or anything other than joined, Entra-joined, or hybrid Entra-joined devices would be would consider as the BYODs, and then how do you manage those scenarios, sort of thing. And that can branch out to other scenarios as well. What if if the user is in the organization corporate network, but they're using a different not a corporate device, and how do you manage those stuff? So that can branch out to those sort of scenarios as well. So yeah, Anto, what do you think about what's your
I guess
thoughts on that?
I'll start it from simple, right? I guess if you're in the Entra space, you should probably know what conditional access is. But I guess for those that are coming in new, conditional access is almost like an if-then statement that controls access into your resources. So your resource-based specific conditions. So that could be logging into an admin portal or logging into a specific application, where it's a set of controls which are almost need to be defined to allow access. It's also a set of controls that you can define to block access as well. So if these controls aren't met, or if these controls are met, block access. So it's not only it's the front door, towards your allowance in, and denying entry. It's an if-then statement. I guess the criticality behind it is in how it's configured as well. Microsoft has done a really good job at being able to define controls against users, groups, roles, specific targets, whether it be applications or specific portals, and then also going a bit deeper into what would be the conditions required to grant access. Now, if for those that aren't aware, MFA, when you enforce it within an environment, is enforced through conditional access. This is a almost a checkpoint where upon login, you are presented with a allow access if MFA is enabled and set up on your account. There's a list of other controls that we can go into it, but I think, bringing it back, a conditional access is essentially the if-then statement that controls access into your environment. I think moving forward, how I'll probably try and structure this is, I guess I'll be a bit of a outsider looking in. what I might do is I might try and just ask questions that people might have in regards to this, and I'll let Andrew and Shayhan answer them. And I can throw some in as well because it's, yeah, I think we're all pretty across it, but I think I might try and almost make this more of a Q&A where, Shayhan and Andrew will shine and I can fill in the blanks where need be.
Oh, I love fireside chats.
Sounds like a plan.
But yeah, look, so I guess you brushed on it before, Shayhan. Let's discuss what makes a conditional access policy. So let's what would be the building blocks to build a effective conditional access policy?
Yeah, I think first of all, we should have a scenario. What are we trying to achieve? It should be most definitely security, but what's the aspect of the security that we need to achieve? And also, we know it's addressing the zero trust and also identity and access management as a whole. So once we identify the scenario, for an example, MFA is a good segue to this discussion. So, and then we need to identify who are our users. This is for all users. Are there any exclusions? So basically, understanding that and understand the exclusions as well, and then coming to so if in this scenario, in this example, what's the type of resource that we want to enforce this MFA in after that? Is that for an application or something else? For example, let's say an application is it all the applications, or what are the exclusions that you have? And then you have your conditions. What are the conditions? What's the device type, for an example? And also, what are the any platforms related? And network. So conditions will be applied if the user is in the network or out of the network, or all the time, and things like that. So when you have your conditions, identified, and then you have your grant, basically. So grant got two options: either you block or you allow. So block is straight away, right off the bat, just block, and then if someone is logging into the system and if they get a block, they will see basically very high level why it's blocked. And if it is allowed, under what, again, I would say under what condition it's allowed, right? So you can say, yeah, you can access this application, but you need to go through these sort of things like MFA in this scenario. And you can do a lot of things with the MFA. How do you want to do the MFA? Because it's multi-factor, right? So if we have identified our authentication methods, and then you can map the authentication methods into the MFA, like how do you want to do it? And again, going a bit further, if you have a authentication strength identified and created, you can map that strength in that authentication method as in the allow section as well, and then the MFA will work accordingly. And then again, once you do that, you have the session, which is the last section, and you can say, for an example, what's the frequency of the user will get an MFA every time, or what's the period of that. And also, we can discuss this in a bit as well, but continuous access evaluation, it's basically by default on, but do you want to switch it off? It's on because if it's on for a conditional access policy, I hope that I'm not going a bit deeper, but I'm just trying to explain it very high level. If CA is enabled for a conditional access policy, I think as Meryl mentioned last week as well, and if there's any outage, hang on. So I think that CA is something different. Let me come back to the CA stuff. I'll cut it off. So CAE is basically continuous access evaluation. So that's something under sessions. So what basically happens is if when the user is using an application with the MFA, if their IP address changed, so then ideally in real time the token will get expired, and they should not have any access to the application going forward. So usually the token refresh would happen every 1 hour's time, if I'm correct, every 60 minutes. But with CAE on, continuous access evaluation on, that will get verified real time. And user disablements as well, they will be near real time as well. So you should have your session controls enabled as well. So yeah, so that's basically the sections of the conditional access policy that you can create for the scenario that you want to apply it to. Yeah.
All right. So I guess, yeah, you've gone through what would be a scenario base, how you would configure a scenario. Where do I start? What kind of scenarios can you recommend, or is there anywhere that recommends scenarios in my case?
Yeah, I think for if someone starting out with the conditional access policy, I would recommend to go to the templates. So when conditional access policies first came in, they didn't have any templates, but right now there are templates for few scenarios. I think for a lot of scenarios. One classic scenario I can take is block basic authentication. So for Exchange, POP, SMTP, and IMAP needs to be blocked. So earlier it was very different. I can remember going into like running batches to block authentication via PowerShell. So that authentication method will be blocked. But with the conditional access policies, you can just block it straight away for all the users. So that's really good. That's a good place to start with. No one recommends that to be switched on these days with the security, which is not good in those authentication methods. So that's a good place to start. So like that, you got a lot of other templates as well, like your MFA, as I just mentioned, and also administrators for like RBAC administrators would get the MFA as well. So then you can, once you get the template, you can change, I think, the conditions if you want to. But yeah, so that's a good place to start, I believe. And then you, once you have, basically when you identify what sort of conditional access policies that you need to create for your environment, the recommendation would be run it with the report only mode. So you can see, it's basically an audit mode, whether it's what's happening with with this conditional access policy. If is it blocking for any critical user for a critical application or something like that, that you need to allow, for an example. Once you have those telemetry, then you can go and enable, and then what's the effect of that, and you are basically prepared for that sort of thing. So yeah, identification of the scenario, and then see whether there's a template in Microsoft, in the Entra portal, and then enable it in the report only mode would give you, some smooth facing to the next level of enabling it for the set of users.
I think to complement that, there's also another place you can look at if you're starting out with security in general. The Security Admin Center, there's a component in there called Secure Score, and that generally is based on what licensing you have available. But if you had conditional access lit up in your tenant, then if you go into the Secure Score, you'll see that you're at whatever percentage of your potential score. And if you go to the recommendations tab, there can be a few actions in there around MFA or certain conditional access. So you can go through that and see the explanations, sort of the impact and the amount of effort that you have to go through, and you can go straight into the relevant other portal or configuration center to then build or use those templates that are readily available to then do that testing.
And I think also because we are based in Australia, I think relevant to the Australian users and organizations, the ASD blueprints, Australian Signals Directorate blueprint, or ACSC. So if you go into that website and if you check for basically for ASD blueprint, then you can, if you go to the conditional access section, then it will say what sort of conditional access policies that you need to enable straight away. So that, I believe, again, that will be a good starting point as well. So that's backed by, that's create those things created by the actual security experts by the help with Microsoft as well. So you got some recommended policies that you can create straight off the bat.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think ASD starts to get into, I guess, more of the, the serious end of security, where I think what they implement, obviously, with caution. I think if you implement what they recommend you implement straight away, you'll probably have some headaches. I think bringing it back a little bit, the templates which you brushed across, 5 categories. One is secure foundations. So as you said, that can be enabling MFA for all users, enabling MFA for anybody accessing the Azure environment. Blocking legacy authentication methods is another one. Requiring a compliant device. So obviously looks at a compliance policy within Intune, so on. There's also all the zero trust. So once again, that's starting to look at the identity protection based policies. So that's your risky sign in, risky users. And that can once again be a risky sign in or a risky user may need to prompt MFA just to reassure that you are who you are. There's also the remote work. So obviously in the hybrid space, that's where it starts to look at requiring a compliant device or a hybrid joined device, specifically for administrators. Obviously segue into BYOD in a bit, but there is some policies you can implement which would allow you to approach BYOD as not such a sore thumb, but almost to a benefit point, but we'll get into that. 2 other categories obviously is the protect admin, which is as said, if you can't enable MFA for all users for any specific, at least start at let's enable it for anybody that can really break your environment, so your administrative roles. And then there's your emerging threats, which is the require phishing resistant MFA for admins. So that's a specific policy which essentially says if you've got an administrative role, you are required to have better than a specific MFA method, and you would obviously define those in Entra, but they are the 5 categories. Coming back into the report mode, please make sure that you enable logging into a log analytics workspace, or you won't see a lot in the reports section. So I think, security first, log everything that you can log, please. Obviously that helps in that space. But yeah, there's
sorry, I was going to say that when you are using report only as a tested, you can also use the what if you can't wait for any actual logging to actually take place. So you can find out sooner what kind of damage you could potentially do, or what policies aren't triggering, for example, as well.
And I think 2 things. I think because we're talking about the what if stuff, Mester that we discussed just last week would be a really good tool as well. So you can get you can see what's going on. Or everything that we created conditional access policies, are they still running as expected, and things like that. And you touched based on the compliance stuff as well. So there's one good thing that I've seen and I've tested as well. You don't specifically need Intune for device compliance. So let's say today you are running on a different MDM, and you can connect that MDM into Entra. So Entra knows about that MDM's result for compliance for a device. So that result can be ported over to Entra ID. And Entra ID, when we create the conditional access policy with device compliance, that result can be identified, let's say, not compliant. Then we can create the conditional access policy around that to block access to a resource. So it doesn't need to be in tune. So if you're running on Workspace ONE, for example, that compliance information can be ported over to the Entra to do your conditional access policies.
You saying you don't use Intune for all of your device management, mate?
Yeah, I used to use Intune. Yeah, I use because it's there, right? Coming with the license. So yeah, ideally, that's the preferred way.
Look, use Intune, right? No, I guess yeah. So, we've talked about what is a policy, how we're building it. We've talked about best processes. Obviously we've deployed some. Do we want to bring up some just general challenges and how we've worked around them in regards to deploying a policy? I guess one thing that I always try and fall on is keeping it as simple as possible. Don't build out these policies themselves to be mammoths, right? I think to Shayhan's point is a specific scenario with one condition, one outcome, one if then is going to be way better than having a like almost a single SOE base, because you will never be able to capture every scenario in one policy. And I think if you look towards creating and managing CA policies specifically for scenarios, so the specifics of enabling MFA for administrators only, that would be your best approach, rather than MFA plus this phishing resistant, plus let's block some legacy applications, plus so on and so forth. The reason why this is also the case is because when you get real deep into it and you start really having specific use cases, you'll obviously want to start to utilize the exclusion group, so who is bypassing that conditional access method. And obviously if you pack all of your settings and all of your conditions into one, and that one person gets to be excluded, they essentially get to wipe their hands free and they can walk through doors as if there was no bodyguard. So I guess one of the challenges that I always try and face is, and I'm a big advocate of the old keep it simple, stupid, where don't overcomplicate it. Security's hard enough. Let's try and approach things as simple as possible, because it'll be just as easy to pick up from the next person.
Yeah, I think talk about that. Documentation is very important as well, because there can be some organizations, they have people who are specifically working on the identity side of things. So they are the SMEs for that. So something like that. But some organizations, they can be the whole systems engineering team who are looking at. So ideally, regardless of that situation, documentation is very important. So the last changes, if someone has excluded something, especially, so that needs to be recorded as well. Proper change requests, proper change process to do the changes. Otherwise, they can be doubling up of the policies as well, and one policy there can be an exclusion, and the other policy there can be an inclusion, and things like that. Policy conflicts as well, so that's another problem. And the worst case is if something goes wrong, you don't know which policy to check. So ideally, keeping it simple, documentation would be a good way to plan out the conditional access policy journey. And as you mentioned, Anto, identifying those scenarios other than the basic stuff, right? So legacy authentication is it's no brainer. MFA is no brainer again. And within that MFA, again, there can be users who are freely using MFA, the applications without MFA. So you need to identify those stuff. So identifying what are the groups, exclusions, and things like that is very important. That can, ease up a lot of confusion in the environment. The other challenges, I would say, I have seen sometimes, you got your licensing, everything, but it's like, if you don't know, you don't know, sort of a situation. So getting educated with around these features and the technology is very important in this day and age. I have seen in a lot of places where say the new firewall is identity. So you need to protect the identity at all costs. So again, this is the front line defense that you have, the conditional access policies, as you mentioned, the front door. So education is very important in that case, but you need to protect. Why you need to protect? Sometimes there can be a bit of a pushback from the users or from management as well. Why I'm getting this MFA every time, sort of a thing, right? So user awareness is important. So that's a challenge that I've seen where people are facing, and management buy-in as well. So then it will be really, sort of easy to implement those sort of things in the environment.
Yeah,
Technicality aside.
user experience, tells
Yes.
all this time. It's always been a recurring thing where it's changed to a process. Oh, it's an inconvenience, but it's security, right?
Yeah.
And when you have to start using your own phone, you download the MFA or Microsoft Authenticator app. There are a lot of people out there who are, for whatever reason, they're very averse to using their personal device to install a third-party
Yeah.
application for the purpose of logging into your work account.
Yeah.
So there are other options. Obviously, we briefly touched on there's FIDO keys or
Yeah.
other methods of authentication, but that's always been a recurring one. Just the adversity, and it wounds me because it's like, well, you need that extra factor. I think what Microsoft did was very clever. Is they added the Authenticator feature into the Outlook app. So if you're already using the Outlook app, you're willingly using Outlook on your mobile, but you don't want to download the Authenticator app, right? So
I guess
yeah, this is,
how I've always approached that, and that genuinely in itself, it could be an episode on how do I get someone to download the app, right? Because I swear every time you roll out MFA, you get the lot. I think, yeah, absolutely. The security key approach by far, yes, it is costly. Yes, it requires some backing infrastructure requirements, configuration, but will be the best approach. I think it comes down to just communicating that it's not a work related requirement, but it is a personal related requirement. So I almost put it down to you need MFA to access your bank, you need MFA to access your social medias, well, you need MFA to access your work as well. It's not a requirement outside of what you are probably already doing because everywhere else has enforced it. Technically, it's probably just the only platform you can fight back on because everywhere else you. Obviously, that gets into a bit more of a rant topic, and I'm going to avoid that to the best of my ability. But really, the MFA is an authentication of you. It is not an authentication of your work. It is not an authentication of. It is you. It is you proving that you are who you say you are, to be allowed access to the data that you are allowed to see. It's no different to you accessing the bank that you're allowed to see, not everybody else's.
protecting the integrity of your identity. So it's you. If one part of you gets compromised, then all of you might just start falling apart, and you kind of don't want that. And that's just not.
Yeah. And I think another option or feature of MFA is the conditional access policies, not specifically to prompt for MFA challenge, but let's say a terms of use form, right? So you are using, let's say you are letting these users to access this application, for an example. Maybe it doesn't require MFA for some reason, or maybe it requires MFA, right? So you push MFA. And also to access this application, you need to press accept for the terms of use. So you are pretty much legally bound. Maybe it's an NDA, for an example. Maybe it says like some terms of how to use this, without doing anything nasty, for so to speak, things like that. So user agrees to that before using. So you can push those stuff as well. And also connecting that to the BYOD situation. It can be a different terms of use. If someone wants to access, let's say for an example, SharePoint from their personal device. All right, so you can access, but you need to make sure that you accept this form, whatever, and you can get the user to read everything, not just scroll down but to read, and then press accept. The accept button will be enabled after that. And also the good thing is the admins can see the logs of the terms of use as well, who has basically accepted, who has pressed declined for some reason. So those will be available as well. So definitely, it's not just MFA, but there are other things that you can do, which can again map with your scenarios.
And that's not just your internal identity, that's external identity. So you got guest users and people from
Correct.
other businesses coming into your SharePoint. They need to accept your terms of use agreements and so on, which is a part of the conditional access. Before we do move on to the BYOD situation, I don't think we touched base on the other applications of conditional access. It's not just your user signing into a device or an app or a web page. You can start registering third-party applications through Entra ID. You can start putting in multi-factor onto, say, your traditional solution, so your RDP or your remote desktop servers and VPNs. You can start integrating that extra feature or extra factor rather. So if you're signing into your VPN, you have to accept the prompt, or if you're signing onto a remote desktop, you get the prompt and so on. But it also conditional access is controlling that because you've registered this service or app. It's in Entra. Conditional access is saying anything that's accessing this resource, make the things happen that we've just talked about. So just wanted to put it out there so that people are aware that there's multiple things that they can also do with conditional access.
Another cool feature in conditional access policies in the session section is called resilient defaults. So it's by default it's switched, it's on, so you can disable the resilient defaults. So what that happens in that situation, basically, let's say someone is accessing 365 for an example, for let's say Outlook, and they are prompted and they are going through that conditional access policies to gain access. So when they're using, let's say if there's a problem with the Entra side of things, in the Microsoft side of things, and if there's a let's say the outage of identity in Entra. So in that case, what will happen? I think this is because there were some outages like long time ago, and that's how it came into the scene. So what happens there is, if you have that enabled by default for that policy, so the secondary identity infrastructure would kick in. That would not take any new authentication requests. If there's a renewal or reevaluation of the policy or something like that, that will just look at the token and renew. And depending on that, let's say if there's a block, it will block. If the MFA needs to be prompted, it will be prompted, but only for any connections that already made by using that MFA policy, that conditional access policy. So that's a cool feature to have. Maybe there are applications that you don't want the user to use if there's an outage, maybe a critical application, because you don't have that specific line of sight access, line of sight access to that application. For an example, now you like visibility, in other words. So then you can say if there's an outage then cut the access altogether, so there'll be no access, something like that. So that's another cool feature that I thought maybe I'll just mention.
I'll probably add off one last feature. I think within the grant section, you have the ability to define that all conditions within grant need to be accepted or just one. Now, this is a great way to approach BYOD, where you can essentially have one of your conditions be, it's a corporate device or it's a hybrid joint device, which almost is a condition in itself that most corporate devices will accept. Now, you could also then tick that if they are not a corporate device or a hybrid joined device or compliant device, they are required to prompt that terms and conditions, or they are required to set up and use MFA. Or so you can also kind of have a fail-safe on some of these conditional access policies, where if you are on a compliant device within the environment and you've got your compliance policies configured to be, fairly up to date, not wait 30 days to make it non-compliant, so on and so forth. You could also use that to bypass the requirement for MFA, where you are on a device that we accept is one of our own. You don't have to prompt MFA. Whereas on the flip of it is that if you are not on a compliant device, or you are not on a hybrid joined device, you must MFA, or you must accept the terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Which then obviously starts to allow for that overarching security in the BYOD space. Segue, wow, how do we manage to do that? I guess, yeah, BYOD, the Chronicles of a Rogue Device. Awesome name, by the way. I guess, look, very high level, BYOD is bring your own device. It's some advantages, some disadvantages of it. I guess, do we want to just go through, where we find the benefits to BYOD? Where do we find the fallovers for BYOD?
Yeah, I would say probably organizations probably, small number of users, and then they are entertaining the users to bring their devices if they want to, or maybe access from home, for an example, or from anywhere else. So that can be one very loose sort of a scenario, or maybe they don't have a BYOD policy at all. Or maybe they're not aware of any BYOD stuff. They just say, okay, use Outlook in your mobile phone or in your home, and just use MFA. That's it. And there's no visibility to the IT administrator in that case. Of course, there are logs that are popping in, but there's no way of managing that device. Say this device, not managing, but let's say putting some rigor around that device. That device needs to be a compliant device in order to access SharePoint, for an example. So I think, again, advantages of BYOD can be organizations don't need to think about the devices loosely. Just go and use whatever you want, sort of a thing. Again, that will be a disadvantage itself, right? So there's no controllability. Anyone can do anything, and if something goes wrong, it's hard to track. So it all connecting together. So it's definitely a love-hate relationship.
Absolutely. I think one of the benefits I'd probably see is just in terms of employee satisfaction. Like, I genuinely think that most devices that you would use for work are probably inferior compared to what you have as a BYO, like what you are using at your current home setup. Only because most people in IT, spent a fair chunk of money a few years back on something that would last them a hell of a long time, and then it goes out of date. But I think even just even the comfort of you might prefer Mac, right? But your operating system within your work SOE is Windows, and so just even allowing for that comfort, the familiarity, just allows for a bit more of an ease into the process. And I think, as you mentioned, the cost savings, right? You're a small company, you've got a tight pockets. Having that BYOD approach where you almost just, once again, hope that they keep security at the forefront of their mind, is the trade-off between saving a few bucks here and there.
Yeah. And I think we discussed about the conditional access policies, some scenarios. So BYOD is definitely a scenario, and it should be a scenario, I would say. In company in any shape or form, for example, and also identifying pretty much sub scenarios as well. Okay, this user is using a not a device that's not joined to the organization, to Entra. Are they using it in your geographical area or out of the country or whatever? So those sort of things needs to consider as well. I would say as the next layer of BYOD controls. So compliance is definitely one of the things, and then the terms of use. Then I would say probably prompt it every time they're logging in. It can be an inconvenience, but BYOD is basically again no control over the device. So at least they are accepting the terms of use, which is basically they are legally bound before they're accessing the applications.
Zero trust, verify explicitly. Just keep making sure that it's them. Otherwise, who knows what could happen. And like we said, with the regional condition as well, you can also set it up so that you're ensuring that they're using, say, supported web browsers, or making sure that you're actually using the Microsoft apps, for example. So yes, you can use your own device, but you need to follow some consistency in terms of what's allowed and what's not. And that's before going down the path of enforcing them to do certain things or enrolling their personal device.
Yeah.
I
think
guess
yeah.
I was going to say, adding to that, there are controls that you can implement within conditional access specifically, which I think you brushed on. It was regarding device compliance. Would be, you don't necessarily have to deploy the measures to enforce the compliance related configuration, but you can almost put put in place the measures to at least ensure that they are adhering to them. And that could just be, the device is up to date. You've got BitLocker turned on, your AV is enabled. There's a minimum OS version, etc. Once again, you don't necessarily have to define the controls associated. You can just define the criteria in which you would allow that BYOD device. That then saves you from old mate finding a laptop in their cupboard from 20 years ago, firing that up, and then trying to access your environment, because someone will.
And also, I think combining everything in authentication methods and connecting it to conditional access policies. You can say if the device is not registered, basically not joined to Entra, and if they're accessing this specific application, so that means they're accessing from a normal, BYOD sort of a device, prompt MFA, but it should be a FIDO2 key. So your users should have the FIDO2 key. So, phishing resistant, right? So in that case, leaking of information or getting that identity component to a bad actor is, very low or no sort of a chance. So that's a good thing as well. I'd say it comes with user awareness, user education, maybe some trials, playing around with the authentication methods or your authentication strengths, and then implement it accordingly. Yeah.
I think, Brett, coming back to one awesome point that Andrew brought up was in relation to apps, your SaaS apps, your third party, your enterprise applications, being able to enforce that wherever what device you are using, you will be required to prompt MFA to access those platforms. So that would be and there is an extensive list of enterprise applications which you can link to your Entra, everything from Dropbox all the way through Box, through you name it, and there's likely some sort of integration that allows you to almost keep the identity platform be it Entra, and then also then govern the access to that platform to then be able to access your corporate data. So regardless of what you're accessing or where you're accessing, just defining a set of controls associated to the access to that allows for that BYOD experience to at least flow without having to manage the device specifically.
And I think logging into the admin portals, right? So if you take that scenario, you can allow an administrator to log into an admin portal within the well, if the device is joined. Again, I'm coming back to the keep coming back to the joined scenario. So you have your device filters that specifically you can use in the conditional access policies. So you create a filter to not to include or include depending on your scenario, depending on your grant situation. Um, okay, in this case, let's say only include the devices that are hybrid joined or Entra joined, and then all the other devices. If someone is and you create your condition for the platforms as well. So let's say all the platforms, for example, but Windows specifically will be the joint scenario coming to the scene. And any other device that's not joined or hybrid joined will be in the block. So it's right off the bat block if someone is trying to log into an administrator is trying to do something on in portals. So those sort of things can be controlled as well.
I think going off once again what Andrew mentioned before, I guess it's that balance between usability and security. There's you can obviously be the iron fist of security, but also you need to weigh up. The end user on the other end is the person that has to, wear the outcome of some of these security measures. And I think almost defining what would be considered user-friendly solutions would be something that I'd almost consider would be required in a startup or a BYOD environment where, for your critical assets, obviously start, verifying with some decent MFA methods, please. But if you are using it for general day-to-day, checking your emails and whatnot, the allowance for just the mobile application should be, well enough to be able to get you by, where you shouldn't need to have, passwordless and the most expensive option. And then, yeah, once again, having that communication line between your frontline staff, I'd almost see as a requirement for any sort of conditional access within the BYOD space, because obviously you have an unfiltered amount of devices which you do not manage. You do not know the output of what each of those devices is having. They could be running extremely, old, out of date devices where you're not really implying a conditional access associated with compliancy, where they might not also have a lot of phone reception, where terms of use in their case or for that specific situation might be a better option, or vice versa. They have probably the worst internet connection. We've all got them folk with internet that probably is less than dial up. What are the alternatives in their space where you'd be able to allow for that? So I think, yeah, balancing the security with usability is a fine line. Obviously, keeping the security hat on as firm as possible, but just defining what that looks like in your environment is kind of critical.
Yeah, I think that slightly dives into the whole identity resilience stuff as well, right? Credentials management, for example, or authentication. How resilient you need to, what levels of resilience that you need to go to, right? So again, as you mentioned, the mobile reception. MFA is depending on when you have the Authenticate app. If you only have the Authenticate app enabled in your authentication options, so, and if there's a problem with the operator, there can be a problem getting that prompt for the MFA. So in that case, what you need to do, what you can do, what sort of other methods that you can enable as a fail-safe, right? And also resilient defaults will come into play as well. And also, let's say, not recommending, but do you want to go to that good old SMS? I would say no. But again, there are other dependencies as well for that. let's say, forgetting about the whole operator side of things, SMS, voice, or authenticator app for data. How about the FIDO2 key, or like a temporary OTP sort of a hardware device which you can give to the users? So those are the other things that you need to think as well when you're enabling, the controls around the identity.
I think segueing almost, slightly away from BYOD, and more approaching that, getting control of that rogue device situation. Obviously that you need a starting point for where you would begin. I guess I'd almost want to bring it to, what would be a framework that you potentially would look towards to approach, you've just come off of BYOD and you brought a fleet of devices. Where would you potentially look in terms of where to define that baseline?
It's a good question. Well, I'd probably look at CIS controls, but they are mainly for user desktops, like corporate assets. But I would say there can be some elements that you can get out of that to enable that for your identity and access management side of things. And also Essential 8 as well, specifically the MFA side of things. And because it's, again, not discussing about the BYOD factor, it's just, customizing those policies according to your scenario. That's my understanding. And then you build your set of policies and you go from there. And I'm always saying to everyone, your conditional access policies are not something that you set and forget, sort of a thing. Again, you need to come back probably let's say every 3 months or 6 months, like frequently should be the thing. And then you need to identify, am I covering all bases? What I'm missing, because Microsoft keep on adding new features. So you need to see, are we looking into those features as well, or do we need that? If yes, do we need to create another policy? Do we need to apply it to a current policy that we have? And documentation needs to be updated as well. So those sort of things. So you need to come back as well. Again, that can be a part of the whole BYOD thing as well. If you don't have anything right now, but if you have other policies, adding that BYOD factor is very important.
Absolutely. I think I want to, dive a little bit deeper into that. I think it should be a blanket statement that any policy you configure within your environment should be reviewed yearly, quarterly, bi-yearly. I think, yeah, as you said, almost every policy that you define is likely not set and forget. And I think even that alone is, a good talking point where your use case, your scenario that you had then may change. I know that, policies that you have an exclusion group associated to can blow out of control. I think that would then also segue into the awesome feature of access review, where ID governance, access review for security groups and all that comes into it, where you can essentially define controls to help with that review, where if you have exclusion groups associated to all of your conditional access policies, let's say you've got 10, you could almost set up a recurring, monthly automated process that goes and double checks what users are present in those security groups, and just whether it be a ping to their management or a ping to them directly, almost a double check to confirm if they are still required to be in that group. You can also have it so that if they don't respond, they get removed, so helps to voice up when you need something in place. But I think, yeah, any policy that's in place is only for the time period that you set the policy, and often enough, you will define a policy, and in a couple of months' time, you would have changed it because your scenario changed. So, yeah, embed the re-review of policies in your day-to-day flow. It'll make your life 10 times easier. Document the changes as you made mention, and then leverage tool sets such as or tool functions such as access review to help you along the way. I could go down the path of lifecycle management for user management and access reviews to get rid of guest accounts and so on and so forth. Utilize automation where possible, but ensuring that you have at least defined, a review process on your policies is as important as having the policies themselves.
Yeah, I think reviewing. Talk about reviewing. So I just saw something that again, Meryl Fernando has created ID Power Toys or ID Power Tools some time ago. So it has a separate section for conditional access policies where when you have that read-only permissions given to that tool, it will go through your conditional access policies and give you an eagle eye view of all the policies and spit out a PowerPoint presentation with all the policies. So the good thing about that is you can present it to your manager, to your upper management as well, if needed, business, the technical decision makers, for example. So, and also, as you said, that periodic review, if you can include something like that, so you can, rather than just going through all the policies, the chances are you might miss something. But if you have a tool like that, then you can see what's going on in that policy in just one pager sort of a thing, and then you can take informed decisions. Do I need this going forward, or what sort of changes I need to make, and what sort of other features I need to enable going forward?
I think putting the IT service provider hat on, like work that into your managed services, right? Like have those quarterly or monthly or whatever cadence you see fit, with or without the features of ID governance. You should just be running some forms of, I guess, assessments across all forms of the security. So stuff changes, right, every minute. So yeah, there could be a bunch of stuff in the config that could change. Definitely those access groups or exclusion groups you mentioned, like that's something that always gets overlooked, and you might find out that Jahan's gone for a trip back to home for a couple of weeks, but that was 3 years ago. He's still in that exclusion group, right? So he's not had MFA for 3 years. That's the kind of thing you don't want to get caught out by.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one that gets overseen, and it might just be, any large organization that manages their own, or any MSP or MSSP that manages, I'd say, Exchange or Defender for Office 365, your whitelists, your safe sending domains and your safe sending emails and whatnot.
We call them allow lists now.
Allow, my bad. I'm not in that space as much as I used to be. That list itself obviously it's almost a policy in a policy, where you define controls and then you define who's allowed to bypass those controls inside of your policy. That list, I think, is one of those alarm bells which probably gets overseen. You go and check all your Intune policies and that's great, and you go and check your conditional access policies and that's all great. But I think there are policies which are almost embedded within other systems that need to be identified, where you might allow controls for an entire, we'll talk purview, right? You deploy a DLP policy, you think it's deployed to everything, you find out it's only been deployed to one site. Or you deploy it and you find out that it's deployed to all sites except, and then there's a list of 20. Being able to define where those policies sit, the frequency, of, and once again, documenting those, I'd almost see as, criticality to an operating environment, especially within a managed services agreement. And I think to that, if you haven't got that in your managed services agreement about something you should do, there's an upsell. So you're welcome. I think just before, I guess, we'll slowly start to wrap it up. I'd like to bring up, obviously we've talked about BYOD devices and I guess how we would manage them. I think one thing I'd probably want to discuss in an upcoming episode, Sharon, you mentioned Essential 8. So I guess bringing it back for those non-Australian listeners, welcome. The Essential 8 was developed by ACSC, which is the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which is a prioritised list of 8 mitigation strategies designed to enhance organisations' resilience against cyber threat. So it's essentially 8 sets of security controls in which they are scaled against a maturity level. So it's not you win, you lose. It's how well you are deploying or implementing that functionality. That in itself ranges across 8 essential categories, which is application control, which prevents execution of unwanted malware programs, etc., etc. Then there's patching of applications. So that's, ensuring that vulnerable applications are patched within a cycle or just patched in general. That then goes into, category 3, which would be your Office macros. So that would just be blocking them straight away or, applying related controls. Then there's user app hardening, which is, configuring your web browsers to block and uninstall Flash if you still got it. Restrict admin privileges. It's essentially everything we've spoken about today, which is essentially your ability to restrict, ensure, not necessarily everything we spoke about today, but limiting the access that space has. Then there's patching operating systems, which is self-explanatory. Daily backups, once again, self-explanatory. And then MFA, which once again we spoke about today. It's the strengthening user accounts against unauthorized access. So that ranges across ML1, 2, and 3. I think, that is where I'd almost want to start. Maybe in an upcoming episode, we might discuss how you could approach the Essential 8 or those technical controls using Microsoft security platform tools. Obviously, it'd be your Entra and your Intune focus. There's also a bit of Azure in there. Not sure how deep we'll go into that, but you definitely will need Azure to do a lot of the backups unless you're using M365 backup. Is anything you guys want to add onto that one?
Well, not specifically for Essential 8 or any framework. I can probably talk that in a minute if you want to add anything, Andrew, before I jump in.
No.
So we discussed about the log analytics workspaces, which is, very important to get that extensive logging of your whatever the identity related activities. It can be for your Intune as well, so that's a whole different sort of a conversation, I would say. But if you have enabled or if you don't have enabled, in that case, pretty much going into that diagnostics area and then stream all the relevant tables. So that can be your even the logs related to your sign-ins as well. So in that sign-in, so you can see, if that's failed, what sort of why it got failed. Something more than what you can see in the standard event, the logs that you can see in Entra UI. So when you have that, information streamed into your log analytics, you can do wonders, right? So you can get KQL up and running, do your KQL queries, and then render it into something like a chart or something like that. So the good thing is you can create your workbooks, and the again something more better than that is you have workbooks created for you that's sitting in the Entra itself. If you go to the workbook section, there are a couple of things for identity access management. So you can use I think there's one for MFA as well. I can't remember off the top of my head the workbooks. There's one for use activities. So you can get it to refresh every 5 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever. So when you have log analytics, when you have your information logs streamed into log analytics, and if you have enabled or activated that workbook for that scenario, then you can see information in a very graphical way, in a very user-friendly way, to understand, let's say, any unwanted IP addresses or where the users are coming from, who are your top users from this country, for an example. So those are really pre-created for you to use. Or you can, if you know your KQL, how to create a workbook and things like that, you can come up with your own ideas as well. Be creative to get that graphical representation of data. So that's my again, reviewing and keep monitoring sort of advice when it comes to conditional access policies. So Anto, anything about the frameworks again? Sorry for the interruption there. I thought maybe
No.
I'll just inform that anyway.
No.
If you don't-
I think moving into where to define a baseline, even essential aid is a big one. I think one that probably got overmissed is the security baselines within Intune. So if you're looking for a starting point in regards to your fleet, obviously some of those baselines themselves also assist within that essential 8, mainly related to the Office macros case. Once again, looking towards ASR policies and whatnot is another good starting point. Where once again turn them all onto audit, then turn them all onto block or warn. There's even the middle point now with warn, which allows you to bypass the block with advisory that A, why are you doing this, and B, it probably will be blocked very soon because we want to, reduce that attack surface. But I think, the entire endpoint security section of Intune is a wicked starting point in regards to just defining what settings could be in place. And then I think to your point, CIS, ASD, Microsoft themselves, they all have, so Lighthouse, so Azure Lighthouse, that thing, they define a security baseline as well, which would be a set of policies which you can deploy within Windows, across Edge, etc., where even they define what would be your security baseline in that space as well. So I think
more along the lines of M365 Lighthouse as well. So when you, as a managed service provider, you have all your customers in a single pane of glass. You have certain security baselines. You can then deploy it to multiple customers in one go. So
that's my bad. I said
yeah,
Azure Lighthouse and not M365
yes,
Lighthouse.
same different. There'd be other. Yeah, well, actually, no, we won't touch that.
Yeah. Well, that's not us. No.
It's a conversation by itself.
But no, yes, you're right. I meant M365. To that, and that defines, what security controls outside of devices which should be in place. So that can be, stopping, some rogue anonymous guest users to start calls and take over calls in Teams, and defining some Entra related permission sets with your identity as well. So once again, I think if you need to find a baseline, you could probably just Copilot security baseline for this, and you'll probably get a list of options. These are just a few where you could look at where to approach going away from BYOD into managing rogue devices.
Yeah. I think we discussed a lot about the rogue devices and pretty much the whole ecosystem of conditional access policies. I think the main scenario in this situation was how to manage that rogue device, or maybe BYOD, for an example. So there will be no rogue devices coming into the environment, accessing the data.
Or at least if they're rogue, they're at least governed by
Yes.
governed by you. Which is, I think, the most important component of it.
Yeah.
Just quickly, did we touch on app protection policies at all?
No, I don't believe so.
No, and I've just got a moment of insanity here. I was looking at the Intune admin center. I was like, where has app protection policy gone? And they've actually just renamed it back to protection, or to protection, under the manage apps heading, so that you can create policies. So for your iOS, iPadOS, Android, Windows, and there's a fourth one, Windows Information Protection. So yeah, there's always something new in here. So
Brilliant.
hmm.
Yeah, so I think that kind of, I'd say, starts to summarize the episode. We discussed conditional access, how to approach the deployment of conditional access, where to start, be it within the template space. I also looked at, some of those common scenarios which might be utilized within those templates across the 5 categories. We also, I guess, showed some experience with, where have our pain points been? How have we dealt with that in that space? We obviously then transitioned into how we would then approach the rogue device of BYOD. So once again, a device that you are not managing. How do you approach that coming into your environment? What should you be aware of? How should you control it? Balancing that security with usability where possible, keeping the communication lines open as much as possible. And then obviously then approaching the what should you be vigilant of, what should you look towards, keep in check of, be it your policies itself, the exclusion groups, where would they, potentially go dormant and then, slip through the cracks. Keep things documented, keep things up to date. I think more noise equals better. And then obviously looking at, the approach to moving away from BYOD if that's an option, which would then be, how do you approach securing these devices? Where should you start? What should you look at? Where are the, open doors to policy, I guess, defaults, which you should either adhere to or look to adhere to. And then obviously some tricky ways that you can keep on top of that, whether it be, Meryl Fernando's Maester or another tool such as Shayhan's suggestion.
ID Power Tools.
ID Power Tools, yeah. And then, I think, on an upcoming episode, I'd love to discuss how we could essentially start to apply some of these baselines across your fleet, whether it be approaching, the ACSE's Essential 8 or another, I guess, platform or baseline default, how that would look like in your environment, what's the kind of user impact that you would expect. We could even approach it in terms of let's just tackle the secure score. Everybody likes a metric-based outcome. It makes it a lot easier to talk to your key stakeholders as to how you're going. I think there's a lot that we can start to unpack in some of these episodes coming up when we start to deep dive in other bits of technology and how we can deploy that, and also share our experiences.
So yeah, for the audience, those watching, those listening, if you've got any specific topics you'd love us to talk about, send through either through leaving us comments, connecting with us and sending us messages or emails and so on. We'd love to hear your feedback. But again, thanks for joining us, and we hope to catch you again next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.